But ladies and gentlemen, I haven't been well. I've been worse than that. Shit, I haven't been that bad. But I've had this terrible headache for about 6 months, continuous. I've had a bloody headache. Christ, for 6 months I've had a headache, and I went and see the doctor, and he said, the reason you got headache, he said, you need to be castrated. I said, well, is that what? Yes, he said, you'll need to be castrated. Christ. But he said, how bad is headache? I said, well, I can't live with headache. If it means being castrated, it'll have to be because I can't live well. He castrated me and I felt better. I felt a lot better, and I come down the road, I thought I'll have a new coat. And I went in the shop, I said, I'll have a sports coat, please. He said, yes. He said, you're a 44. I said, how do you know that? He said, that's my job. I know just by looking at you, you're a 44. Christ. He said, what about the new trousers? I said, yeah. He said, you're a 30 inside leg. I said, how do you know that? Well, he said, that's what I do. That's what I do. I'm a tailor. That's what I do. Now, he said, what about a new pair of pants? He said, you're a 36. I said, I'm not. I'm 34. No, he said, you are. You're 36. I said, I'm telling you, I always wear a 34. He said, listen, if you wear a 34, it'll pinch your balls that tight, it'll give you a headache. But little job. Last week, of course, I live near the St. Morgan Naval Air Station, and we get all the Americans down there, and they come to take my daughters out. Bastards. Last Tuesday night, a knock come to the door, and a man said, good evening. My name is Lance. I've come to see your daughter Nance. I'd like to take her to the dads. Any chance? I said, I don't know. I said, Nance, there's a man called Lance that'd like to take you to the dance. Any chance? Yeah, she said, I'll be right down. Well, the one very long for the door knock again, and the man said, good evening. My name is Joe. I come to see your daughter Flo. I'd like to take her to the show. Do you think she'll go? I said, I don't know. I'll ask her. I said, Flo, there's a man called Joe. I'd like to take you to the show. Will you let her go? Yeah, she said, I'll be getting right down. Well, the one very long before the door knock again, and the man said, good evening. My name is Tucker. But just down from us, little job, there's a poor old boy down there. He's a dear old boy. He's getting married, and he said to the doctor, he's a lovely boy, he's called Penrose. And he said to the doctor, I'm getting married, he said, to an 18-year-old girl. He said, you're 91. He said, I know, but he said, the doctor said, you'll never cope. He said, just a word in your ear, take in a lodger. Just help out. Well, you see the doctor last week, he said, everything's all right. He said, my wife is pregnant. Christ. He said, what about the lodger? He said, she's pregnant as well. But poor old Fernley-O, he see down there, well, he hadn't had sex with his wife for years, and she said, she see the doctor, she said, have you got anything that I could give him to pepper him up a bit? Well, he said, I've got some tablets, but they're very, very strong. He said, whatever you do, don't give him one, more than one. He said, I'll give you 30, one for every day of the month. And he said, see how he is after the month. Well, she rung him the next morning. She said, I give Fernley them tablets. He said, how many did you give him? Well, she said, I thought he was particularly dead, so I give him the bloody lot. Right. He said, what happened? Well, she said, we were sitting down having dinner, and she said they must have worked. Because he jumped up, he pulled the tablecloth right off the table, all the dishes all over the floor, smashed the bloody lot. He held me drawers off, and he bent me over the table, and then he shagged me for 5 hours and 20 minutes. Right? Well, he said, I'm sorry to hear about all the dishes. Well, she said, don't worry too much. We won't go to that restaurant again. Of course, I've worked all over the world. I was in the northern provinces of Scowida, laying train lines with about 2,000 men. And I said, how do you manage for a bit of sex? They said, well, there's a camel. That's what we use for sex, the camel. I said, no, I don't think so, not me. I said, I don't think I could use the camel. Well, after 6 months, you do tend to bend a bit. So I said, I think I'm going to try that camel. So I went down with 2 milk bottle crates and got up, shagged the camel. And the man said, hey, he said, we don't use him for that. He said, we use him to ride into town. But, see, ladies and gentlemen, somebody said to me the other day, he said, what do you think about the euthanasia? I said, the same as the youth in Cornwall, they bloody nuisance. And somebody stole the vicar's bike. And he said to me, Jethro, some bastard have stolen my bike. I said, well, look, Reverend, when you're in church on Sunday morning, what you want to do is read out the 10 Commandments, and when you come to thou shalt not steal, have a look around. See if anybody's looking guilty. He said, that's a good idea. I'll do that. Well, I seen him come out of church. I said, did you find who stole your bike? He said, Jethro, I got in the middle of the 10 Commandments. And he said, when I got to thou shalt not commit adultery, I remembered where I left my bike. But it was great. I remember last time we seen Yeovil, and I said to Denzel, we ought to take a bit of a present home for the girls. And we found some lavatory brushes with yellow handles and black bristles. They're lovely, they was. Great long lavatory brushes. See, when I was a boy, Father fed us whole family for a fortnight on a lavatory brush baked in clay. I was only young, I didn't know. But I thought he had a bloody long nose for a hedgehog. Well, we took these the man he gift wrapped them for, they lovely, he gift wrapped them, they bloody lovely. And I took him home and I said to Denzel the following week, I said, how's your wife getting on with a lavatory brush? Well, she said she tried it for about a week, but she don't like it. She's gone back to paper again.